Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Just hours after the Easter ceasefire ends, Russia launches missiles and drones at eastern Ukraine, waking up Kiev with air raid sirens. This comes as Washington says it would welcome an extension of the truce, with both sides accusing each other of thousands of breaches. US Vice President J.D. Vance arrives in Delhi for talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. His family joins him on a 4-day personal trip, which starts with US-India discussions on a bilateral trade deal. Reports say that US Defense Chief Pete Hegseth shared details of a Yemen attack in a signal chat for the second time. Questions are growing over the use of an unsecured platform for classified info. China warns countries against striking a broader economic deal with the United States at its expense. This hikes up the narrative in spiraling trade war between the world's two biggest economies. Israel says several professional failures led to the killing of 15 unarmed Red Crescent paramedics near Rafah. The IDF says a commander will be dismissed following the review. Houthi officials say American airstrikes hit Sanaa, targeting homes and a market. The rebel-run health ministry reports 12 dead and 30 wounded. Israel's offensive on Gaza continues with over 30 dead in 24 hours. Fresh strikes on Khan Yunis have killed and injured several more. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele wants to trade 252 deported Venezuelans imprisoned in his country for political prisoners. The US has appeared welcoming of his proposal. Our top story today: Russia has launched fresh missile and drone attacks on Ukraine just hours after a one-day Easter ceasefire came to an end. Air raid sirens rang out overnight across Kiev and the eastern regions, with alerts also issued for central and southern areas, including Malakov, Zaporozhye and Kherson. Ukrainian officials say there were explosions in Molokhayev, though no casualties or major damage have been reported so far. The scale of strikes is still unclear. Russia has not commented on the overnight assault. Both sides accused each other of violating the ceasefire, which ended at midnight. Kiev claims nearly 3,000 violations by Russia, while Moscow says Ukraine fired hundreds of times and launched over 900 drones. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump remains hopeful, saying a peace deal could come this week, but he warned the US may walk away from talks if there's no progress. We move over to the Middle East now. The Houthi rebels' health ministry said early on Monday that new US airstrikes on the Yemeni capital Sanaa killed at least 12 people and have wounded 30. According to the reports, the strike took place on a market and a residential zone in Sanaa's Farwah district. This comes after other raids were reported late Sunday in the central province of Marib, Hodeida in the west and the Houthi bastion of Sada in the north. Reportedly, the US military has been carrying out almost daily attacks for the past month, saying it was targeting the Iran-backed Houthi terrorists to stop attacks on international shipping in the Gulf. Meanwhile, a mass funeral was held on Sunday in western Yemen's Hodeida province for the victims of US airstrikes that took place on Saturday and destroyed several public facilities. Residents of Hodeida took to the streets calling for an end to US strikes targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. We move on but stay in the region. According to reports, Israeli forces have killed 32 people in Gaza, including at least 2 people killed in an attack on tents in the safe zone of Al-Mawasi and 4 others killed in an attack on a home in Khan Yunis. Meanwhile, dozens of protesters clashed with police on Saturday in the central Israeli community of Mazor, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was expected to visit. Demonstrators voiced their anger at his vow to continue the war with Hamas, demanding an end to the war and the release of the remaining 59 hostages held in Gaza. Here's what the protesters had to say.
Still 59 hostages in Gaza, dead and alive. Many of them died because of the pressure, the military pressure. The military pressure is not bringing the opposite. The military pressure is killing them. So this war is just a war that had to end many months ago. There's no purpose, there are no achievements anymore. We just again and again in the mud of this war. And the fact that Bibi is a liar is known all over the world. I can't say more than that. He lies like I breathe.
Let's move on. The Israeli military said on Sunday a review into last month's killing of emergency responders in Gaza found there had been several professional failures and that a commander would be dismissed over the incident. However, another Israeli army probe into the incident found no evidence of indiscriminate fire by troops and maintained that 6 victims were Hamas members, and expressed regret over the civilians killed in the incident. The Palestine Red Crescent also denounced the report as full of lies and called for an independent inquiry by the United Nations. The incident drew international condemnation, including concern about possible war crimes from UN Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk. The medics and other rescue workers were killed when responding to distress calls near the southern Gaza city of Rafah early on March the 23rd, days into Israel's renewed offensive in the Hamas-run territory. Gaza Civil Defense has accused the Israeli military of carrying out summary executions, rejecting the findings of the internal probe that denied any Israeli execution-style killings. A civil defense official said that this video, filmed by one of the paramedics, proves that the Israeli occupation's narrative is false. He also accused Israel of seeking to circumvent its obligations under the international law. We are joined by Shri GA Das Gupta, geopolitical expert located in New Delhi, to discuss this situation further. Shruti, thank you very much for joining us. What do you think? This has obviously been an ongoing situation, this probe by the IDF, not an independent probe, may I add. What do you think of the response by the IDF into this killing of these 15 unarmed medical workers, and their response that they are going to dismiss a commander, but doesn't seem like much else?
We have to understand that the Gaza conflict is a global moral flashpoint right now, where the West and the rest are against each other. So Palestine itself, Gaza itself, is a hotbed of lot of terrorist activities. It is very difficult to distinguish Hamas from the rest of it. Hamas is Gaza, Gaza is Hamas. That is the slogan that is known for in this entire conflict. You cannot discount the fact that the UNRWA report a while back showed that even the UN was complicit in funding Hamas activities. UNRWA people were directly aiding Hamas in their jihad, as you call, towards Israel. So now when Israel is taking accountability right now, they're saying that yes, there was a problem and we were not able to fully report at that time, but they have shown that there were 6 Hamas fighters that were part of this entire conflict. And unfortunately, this is what happens when there are conflict zones, civilians will get attacked. So I'm not sure whether it is just going to be they attacked the civilians. There were Hamas people. The IDF is reporting honestly, if you're saying that they're looking for a scapegoat for the failure that happened and resulted in loss of life, yes, they would probably find someone to take the blame. But is it going to be just blatant gun shooting or people just being like, there's no apology? This entire report itself is an apology. It's an admission of guilt towards harming innocent lives.
Shruti, obviously previously in this investigation, Israel was found releasing a false statement that the ambulances were moving suspiciously. This was then found out not to be true. Why does Israel not support an independent probe in this investigation?
Because it's very difficult to find an independent party right now. As I said, the UN itself was found complicit in aiding Hamas fighters via the UN RWA program. So it is very difficult. Whom do you hold as an independent body? Of course, there are war crimes happening. I will not deny the possibility of the fact that they have been using a lot of media management to try and present a more pro-Israel narrative towards the world. But who started the fight and who's going to end it is going to be a very different question altogether. So it is the pressures, of course, being mounted. UN agencies are demanding an external investigation, but whom would you trust? Would you trust a US investigation? But even then, the Hamas would come around and say that US is complicit and is very towards the actions that Israel does towards Gaza. So it's not very cut and dry. It's not directly understandable whether who is going to do it. Europe, on the other hand, it might be a neutral party, but not completely. They have shown pro-Hamas tendencies rather than pro-Israel. The October 7th attack was condemned by everybody, but a lot of international forces are now siding towards Gaza. So whom would you, the lines are very clear cut and drawn. Who is the neutral party and who would be able to give you a perspective which is truly neutral? Whether Gaza is on the right when the Palestine Red Crescent is saying that they were harmed unnecessarily, who decides that there was no provocative actions that led to this particular incident? So neutral party is very difficult to decide when there is an actual war zone happening.
Shruti, but critics would say that Israel is not a neutral probe, especially after they've been found contradicting themselves. Do you not think that this needs to go a bit further? Do you not think that a neutral probe does need to be found to get to the bottom of this? As I said, that Israel have been, especially in this case exactly, have been found contradicting itself and giving out false statements. So should this not be moved further by an independent party?
I agree with you. There needs to be an investigation on humanitarian grounds. But my question again comes to the fact that who would you classify as neutral? Because UN itself was not neutral. The people that were part of UN RWA were found to be Hamas aiders. So you cannot turn around and say that, okay, Israel is at fault, but who finds its fault? So right now, Gaza issue itself is very volatile. It's, as I said, a global moral flashpoint. We are unable to decide, sitting outside, who is going to be neutral towards the actions that have actually happened there. Of course, there should be a probe, but who will do it? Whose word will be final? Because everybody has vested interest in what is happening in Gaza right now. It has become a war of the world rather than just between these two nations. There are supporters and there are people who are against Israel's actions. So anybody who wants to suppress Israel will obviously go towards, will probably will be tilting on the other side on the moral scale. And anybody supporting Israel would be tilting the moral scale towards the benefit of Israel. So my point is that it is an internal probe, and in an internal probe, they are admitting to their guilt. So there has been definitely some violation of humanitarian grounds, and some international law must have been violated. They are ready to take on the action and have, identified one person whose actions have led to the loss of life, innocent life. So that is in itself an admission of guilt, and we should be appreciative of that. Also, we should keep in mind that there were 6 identified Hamas people in the action itself that killed these innocent people. So an external probe will find probably the similar thing.
I believe that the family of these people have come out and say that they didn't support Hamas. Their social media has been probed in saying, and they had no signs of being part of Hamas. Surely there needs to be further investigation into this, and it's completely contrasting opinions here.
True, the family has come out and said that they are not Hamas supporters, but Gaza is flooded with a lot of Hamas supporters who do not directly support it. Maybe they do not pick up arms, but they support their actions. right? And at some point of time or the other, the full of lies bucket is going to tilt, and you'll find that they did participate in some anti-Israel agenda. So a violation of international human rights is a very big battlefield in the Gaza war itself. But who violated first? How far was their Gaza narrative towards the Hamas or pro-Israel is something which is very controversial right now. Misidentification can be done. It's a military zone. A misidentification is not always malicious. And a tactical confusion, like the benefit of doubt for tactical confusion, should be given.
Thank you. Shri GA Das Gupta, thank you very much for joining us. We once again stay in the Middle East, where Lebanese President Joseph Aoun said that disarming Hezbollah must happen through careful, non-confrontational dialogue, not rushed decisions, especially as Israel continues airstrikes in breach of a ceasefire. Speaking after an Easter meeting with a Maronite patriarch, Aoun says controversial issues must be addressed through consensus to avoid national collapse. Here's what President Aoun said.
نعالج الموضوع بروية وبمسؤولية لأنه هذا الموضوع حساس ودقيق وأساسي للحفاظ على السلم الأهلي. برجع بالكم أي موضوع خلافي بالداخل اللبناني لا يقارب إلا بالتحاور والتواصل وبمنطق تصالحي مش التصادمي وإلا رح ناخذ لبنان على الخراب.
The Trump administration has pressured Lebanon to disarm the Iran-backed group, and Aoun last week commented to doing so by the end of 2025. Meanwhile, the Lebanese army forwarded a rocket attack on Israel in Sidon, seizing launch pads and arresting suspects. Prime Minister Nawaf Sharif emphasized that the state's exclusive right to possess arms. Hezbollah, however, has vowed not to disarm while Israel continues to occupy Lebanese territory. We move over to the United States, where the Pentagon has dismissed all claims of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sharing classified information. Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell has accused the New York Times of being a Trump-hating media outlet after the newspaper reported that Hegseth had shared Yemen war plans in a second group chat. Reportedly, Hegseth shared details of US strikes in Yemen, including FA-18 flight schedules, in a private signal chat with his wife, brother and his lawyer, while the group created before his confirmation was meant for scheduling, but later included sensitive military information. This comes after The Atlantic exposed another chat where similar details were mistakenly sent. While the Pentagon denies sharing classified material, lawmakers and ex-officials are calling for Hegseth's removal. Critics say his actions show poor judgment and risk national security, especially as some chat participants had no clearance, all while Trump and the White House continue to back him. Let's move over to South Asia now, where US Vice President J.D. Vance has kicked off a 4-day visit to India, aiming to deepen ties with the Trump administration and steer clear of steep US tariffs. Vance touched down in New Delhi today, receiving a red carpet welcome, complete with an honour guard and folk dancers. The trip, which includes personal stops at the Taj Mahal and a wedding in Jaipur, marks a significant diplomatic push. His wife Usha and children are accompanying him. Vance arrived from Rome, where he held a private Easter Sunday meeting with Pope Francis. Talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi begin today. A potential early trade deal and fairer two-way trade is at the top of the agenda as both nations look to expand defence cooperation. Modi and Trump last met in February in Washington. India is now reportedly open to slashing tariffs on over half of its US imports, worth nearly $42 billion in 2024. With Trump labelling India a tariff king, New Delhi hopes this visit will help reset the tone and fast-track negotiations. We move over to the Indo-Pacific, where Beijing has strongly criticized countries making trade deals with the United States at China's expense. The Chinese government warned that such appeasement would not bring peace, and those compromising China's interests would face countermeasures. China has been hit with tariffs as high as 145% on some products, while the rest of the world faces 10% levies. In response, Beijing has imposed its own 125% duties on US goods. A spokesperson for China's Commerce Ministry stated that seeking temporary gains at China's expense would ultimately harm everyone. The comment comes as the US and China continue to negotiate over tariffs, with both sides still at odds. Beijing has vowed to fight the trade war to the end and criticized what it calls Washington's protectionist approach. Let's turn to Central America. Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele has sparked international controversy by offering a prisoner swap to Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The return of 252 Venezuelan migrants recently deported from the United States and detained in El Salvador in exchange for the release for an equal number of Venezuelan political prisoners. Venezuela's Attorney General Tareck William Saab swiftly rejected the proposal, calling it cynical and demanding full details on the detained migrants, including legal status, charges and proof of life. The migrants were deported under the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, a wartime law the Trump administration has revived to justify mass deportations, citing gang ties, particularly to Trendy Aragua, now labelled a terrorist organisation by Washington. The US Supreme Court halted further deportations over the weekend, questioning the administration's use of the obscure law. Among the deportees is Maryland resident Kilmar Obredo Garcia, who was mistakenly expelled despite a court ruling protecting him from deportation. Let's listen in to what James Sample, Hofstra University law professor, had to say.
So for the Supreme Court to weigh in at 1 a.m. on a Saturday, on a holiday weekend no less, tells you that the Supreme Court does not have faith that the government of the United States of America will follow through on the orders that it receives from the Supreme Court. That is a dire and telling circumstance.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, after visiting Garcia in El Salvador, accused the Trump administration of violating constitutional rights and ignoring the Supreme Court's order to facilitate Garcia's return. He also asked the Trump administration it should put up or shut up in court. Meanwhile, Trump lashed out on his Truth Social, not specifically naming the High Court, but slamming the weak and ineffective judges and law enforcement officials who are allowing this sinister attack on our nation to continue, he said. On the other hand, Bukele claims the deportees are violent criminals, while Venezuela insists many of its political prisoners are jailed without due process for opposing Maduro's rule. The proposal highlights growing tensions over migration, human rights, and executive power as deportations continue to fuel legal and diplomatic battles across the Americas. Let's move north. With just 1 week to go before Canada heads to the polls, the Liberal Party, now led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, is pulling ahead. Recent polls show the Liberals edging out the Conservatives, fueled by voter concerns over US President Donald Trump's trade war. Carney, who replaced Justin Trudeau last month, is leaning on his global economic credentials to position himself as the steady hand Canada needs. Early voting turnout hit record highs, and televised debates drew unusually large audiences, signalling heightened interest in the April 28th vote. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre wants the front-runner has been forced to recalibrate as Trump's rising influence in the race has shifted momentum. Analysts say that Carney's calm, experienced approach is resonating with voters who are worried about economic stability and national sovereignty. To South Korea now, where former President Yoon Suk-yeol appeared in court today for the second hearing of his criminal trial on insurrection charges. Yoon, impeached earlier this month, is accused of attempting to subvert civilian rule by declaring martial law and deploying armed soldiers to Parliament in December. This marks the first time cameras were allowed inside the courtroom, showing Yoon seated in the defendant's chair. If convicted, he could face life in prison or even the death penalty, though executions haven't been carried out in South Korea since 1997. Yoon, the first sitting president in South Korean history to be arrested, was briefly detained in January but released on procedural grounds. His case has sparked political turmoil, with police last week blocked from raiding his former office over related obstruction charges. To Europe, where Pope Francis has made a highly anticipated appearance at St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday, greeting thousands with a heartfelt Happy Easter from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. The 88-year-old pontiff, looking frail and in a wheelchair following a serious illness, entrusted his traditional Easter blessing to a clergy member who delivered a powerful appeal for peace across global conflict zones. The message highlighted the suffering in Gaza, Ukraine, Yemen and in Myanmar, as well as unrest in parts of Africa and the Middle East. The Pope expressed concern over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, growing anti-Semitism and ongoing war in Ukraine, urging ceasefires, hostage releases and respect for religious and personal freedoms. His appearance ended with a ride around the square, pausing to bless babies as worshippers cheered in celebration of the resurrection. Let's listen in to what he said.
Preoccupa il crescente clima di antisemitismo che si va diffondendo in tutto il mondo. In pari tempo il mio pensiero va alla popolazione e in modo particolare alla comunità cristiana di Gaza, dove il terribile conflitto continua a generare morte e distruzione e a provocare una drammatica e ignobile situazione umanitaria. Faccio appello ai belligeranti: cessate il fuoco, si liberino gli ostaggi, si presti aiuto alla gente che ha fame e aspira ad un futuro di pace. Cristo risorto e fonda il dono pasquale della pace sulla martoriata Ucraina e incoraggi tutti gli attori coinvolti a proseguire gli svolti volti a raggiungere una pace giusta e...
Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the globe.